Well, hello, and welcome back to Black Hammer Arts, and today is a very exciting video. As long awaited, we will finally be getting into some proper forging. I know the channel we've said it's kind of about forging, blacksmithing, but we've actually only done one video on that so far, so we're finally going to be getting to that after getting all the other things out of the way, and we're going to be making an axe. Kind of a Viking style axe, as it's known in regular culture today, although it's really all over the place in basically all of medieval Europe. And we're going to be making it out of this piece of flat stock. This piece of railroad spring clip is actually what this is, but any piece of high carbon steel will do. So here I have kind of a template of what we'll be forging the body of the axe out of. I'm just going to take a moment to explain to you how this process works before we dive in. So, as you might be able to see, and this weld did not take perfectly, we'll try to avoid that, but it's not structural, it's all right. This, the body of the axe, and this, the bit of the axe, are two different pieces. These two different pieces. So basically, we'll take and cut at this line, roughly, this bit off, and then we'll forge some shoulders, and you can see I've already taken and done this on another piece to kind of demonstrate to you. So we forged shoulders in, and I'll show you how to do that at the anvil. We will then bend this around. This will become the eye of the axe. Bend that around. And we will cut this off here, and we will turn that into the bit of the axe. We'll then forge weld them together. I'm not going to go over completely how forge welding works in this video. I will explain the forge welding as it is pertinent to this particular project. I will do a forge welding video in the future. Just explain how all that works. That's a future video. Keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, as you can see, the roof is gone. The reason for that is just simply it was kind of starting to collapse, becoming pretty unsound, and also the forge was dangerously close, kind of making me worried, so we just took it down together. And since it's summer, we don't really need it anyway. That's one thing. If you're starting blacksmithing, you might think you need a shop or a space to start in. A bit of your yard will work just fine. So now I'm just going to get the forge up and going. I've already shown how to do that in other videos, so I won't waste your time with that. One other thing is, you may notice if you look at the forge, I've changed my design a little bit on the forge. That's because the design I have worked really good for working long work, but I haven't really been doing that a lot lately. So this is more conducive to short work. It's a kind of a fire pot style rather than two walled style. So just a quick note. So putting it in the forge. I've already broken up most of this charcoal to a reasonable size, but oftentimes when you get it, it'll be a little big. You may have to break down some of the pieces. One thing you're going to want to remember if you do work outside is a saying, sun cools your metal. What it means is, it's really difficult to tell, oftentimes, I'm going to change the orientation of this, how hot your metal is if you're working in the sun. So just keep that in mind. I'm marking it. I'm not probably going to actually cut through it all the way here. I'm working into a pretty low heat now, because it's pretty hard to see where exactly you're cutting when it's really hot. So that'll do. We got a good mark. I'm definitely not going to miss that. You don't want to cut quite all the way through. And you also don't want to drop stuff on the ground. Right, so this is the piece that will become the body now, and this will become the bit. The bit is the cutting edge of the axe. This is the bit of the axe, this is considered to be the body of the axe, and this is the eye of the axe. What I'm about to do when I pull this piece out of the forge in a minute is I'm going to do what's called setting in shoulders. So basically that is where you'll place the piece over the edge of the anvil and strike, or they're also called half-face blows, is what this is called. Half-face, so basically half of the hammer is on the anvil and half of it's off, like so. So you place the piece where you want to set in the shoulder. This one already has the shoulder set in, but I can do the same thing here if it was hot. You place that here, there, and then you will strike it, and that will set in this. So it's higher on this side, becomes lower on this side, and then we will flatten out the area in between to make the eye when we fold it. We'll set in a shoulder here and a shoulder here. Also, I'll be using this as a reference piece These shoulders I'll be marking in are about 3 inches in from the end, and this is also about 3 inches, making it a total of about 9 inches or a little over. It's important when you're working with a hot charcoal forge, a really hot one. This one gets quite hot. To make sure that you are, here you can see I'm using that as reference. We have our first shoulder marked in. I'm going to quickly flip this around to make that a little deeper and mark the other side as well. I want it just a little bit shorter than that one probably, because it will get a little longer as I spread it out. There we go. Be careful not to hit the corners of your anvil when you don't have a piece over them, because you wreck the corners of your anvil and you will not be happy later. Probably looks kind of cold on camera. All right, everyone who's watching, do not do this. I am serious. This is not only dangerous, as far as I just burned the piece, in case you didn't see that. Those little sparks. It's dangerous, but it's also can easily be the compromise of your workpiece. Be careful. Try not to work quite in that high of a heat. I just left that going for a little long. The good thing is, if you can reach a sparking, burning heat like that, you can definitely reach a 412 in heat. So, not all bad news. I believe this will be the first time we've done any forge welding on the channel. I'm now just gonna flip this around. You could do this in the vise if you wanted to, but let's see here. I'll grab this in the middle. That's getting kind of a low heat, so I'm gonna stick this back in the forge. I just realized I should probably open this up a little bit so I can get a brush in there. Clean the scale up a little bit. There we go. Doing this at a pretty low heat. It's fine. All I'm doing is just kind of tinkering around, getting stuff kind of properly aligned before we go into the forge weld. Anything you can do before the forge weld, you should do. Also, you should probably try not to light your brush on fire. The reason I'm doing this is to clean off anything I can out of there before I forge weld it, because if there's scale in there, which there still is some amount of scale in there, we'll take care of that in a minute, it will not weld. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to make sure those shoulders that I set in are well lined up. That's important. Getting it all ready to go. I'm gonna put a little bit of flux in there. What flux will do, if you're not familiar with it, is it will get in there and when it'll melt. I usually use 20 Mule Team borax as my flux. Just talk less and work more. I'm gonna take one more heat on this before I flux it. So again, I'm just gonna finish getting this all lined up. I'm gonna use a little bit lighter hammer here. I will also use a lighter hammer when I go in for the weld. But yeah, to finish what I was saying about the flux. Basically what it does, is it turns into boric acid when it melts. So you can see here, this is flux. And I'm using 20 Mule Team borax, as I said. You wanna put a decent amount on, and it will melt, turn to boric acid, go down in there, and it will dislodge, that boric acid will dislodge the scale from the inside of your piece. And then float it out. So when you hit it, all that liquid boric acid squeezes out of there and takes the scale with it. Now, that's a big one. If you don't know what forge welding is, it's basically cohesion. You heat two pieces of steel or iron up and you stick them together, and provided the surfaces are clean, they will fuse and become one material. I'm not gonna be able to talk much while I'm welding. It's gotta be done very quickly because it will cool down too much and you won't be able to weld it very quickly. So I'm gonna use a small hammer. This is an important thing. I'm gonna use a small hammer because if you really wail on it the first time, you'll probably pop it apart and it won't weld. And then it'll get scale in there, all sorts of problems. So use a light hammer, light quick blows, like that. I'll just take it out. I'm gonna weld it very quickly. If there's some sort of loudmouth in your shop, tell them to shut up and go away. You have to be able to focus and act very quickly when you're doing this. If you see sparks coming out of your forge, pull it out right away. I did not burn it this time, just for the record. All right, here comes the test. If it's not very well welded, or not welded at all, it'll probably start splitting apart when I hammer it on this way. Touch it. I'm gonna flex it and it's going back in the fire. And historically, flex welding, or using flex when welding, is absolutely historical. Borax was used as well as a historical flex. Also, I have been told sand can work. Probably not quite as well as borax, but it does work, I have been told. I've never used sand, but it would be interesting to experiment in the future. Tell me what you think in the comments. I'm gonna take this to the vise. So what I'm doing here, if you don't already know, is I'm making the slot for the bit to go in. So if you didn't understand me before when I said it, this is where this bit is going to slot in there. But I'm not actually going to do it yet. I just want to make sure that this bit is not welded up here. This up back here, I want this welded by the eye. I don't want this welded. So I am going to go in for probably at least one more welding heat. But first, just probably brush this first. And then I'm actually going to spread these out because the thinner it is, the better it will weld as a rule. And I guess that's about all the brushing I can do. You can see, if it is not going to weld anywhere, it's always going to be on the edges, which means you can grind or file it out at times, which is good, but it also means the cosmetic failure will be on the outside usually. So I want to try and use flux when you can. Sorry, Roy. If you don't know, most beginner blacksmiths have probably watched a channel called Christ-Centered Ironworks. It's a great channel, highly recommend it. Probably leave a link, whichever side it is. But one of the things he's big on is not overflexing your forge weld. And he's a great welder, but I would probably say especially when you're just beginning, it's probably better to overflex than to underflex. So use flex as much as you need to. Don't just drown it in flex, but use it wherever you can see a surface, essentially. Put a light coating on. Hard to get at. Also, I'm not a big glove wearer, but if you feel like wearing gloves would make you safer, go ahead and wear them. If there's ever a time to wear gloves, it's probably forge welding. I'm kind of forging it a bit more now because it's actually welded now. And I'm using this horn. This is about the one place these stupid kind of flat horns actually do come in handy. This is on a project about like this. I'm going to, now I'm going to close this down. These are not welded together here. I'm going to spread them out and make them thinner. They should, even though they're not welded together, which is good, we don't want them welded, they should spread out about evenly. You want to take care when you're doing this, keep these below welding heat. If you don't know what welding heat is, there's not really any way I can show you on camera because the camera does not give an extremely accurate representation of what a welding heat looks like, or any heat for that matter. I'm gonna take these to the vise in just a second and split them apart. They shouldn't be welded on the very end here, I don't think, but I'm just gonna make sure. Good. The end here is not welded, so I'm gonna continue on. I'm doing is I'm just spreading these out, and that will make them thinner, so they will weld more easily and not leave nasty looking seams. It's honestly just cosmetic. The seams don't really hurt anything, but they do look weird, so I'm gonna get rid of them best as I can. If you do run a solid fuel forge, which I highly recommend, I am of the opinion, as many smiths are, that they are superior to gas forges. If you do run, one of the nice things is I can heat this up, and I don't have to heat this up. I can get very localized heats. The reason why that's valuable is not only because that means I don't mar this, but also because that means that I'm not heating this up more times than I have to. Every time you heat this up, you're leaching carbon out for one thing, and you're scaling it, which means it's getting thinner because it's losing metal to scale. So there's a reason why we like solid fuel forges so much. Right, so I promised we're not going to make this into a forge welding video where I explain all the forge welding stuff. I'll do that later, but just in case you don't know what's going on, what we're doing is called a scarf weld. So I've thinned that down, and basically all that means is that we're tapering two ends to fit properly together and fit seamlessly. If you have two big old, set that down, there we go, two big old chunks you try and weld, this one, it's like if I tried to weld like this one's gonna push down into this one and create a crack in between where this area does not weld. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So I'm now going to take this, which is the bit, we're going to scarf it down on one end, tapering it down basically is what that means. Taper it down so it'll be easy to weld. Then I'm just going to leave the body of the axe outside the forge because I don't want to burn it, as I already have. Careful not to do that. Try not to hit your anvil. So a real quick question I'd like to answer. This doesn't really specifically pertain to axe making, but it's just something I've heard. People ask, you say don't hit your anvil like I just did on accident there. And that means don't really hit it. But you'll often see blacksmiths, they'll be working, and they'll do that. And if you're wondering why that is, I can explain it, but I won't. No, actually, if you're wondering why that is, it's to kind of keep a rhythm going. It's healthier for your arm for one thing, to just not stop like that. It just helps you, it really, really helps keep your arm from getting worn out. If you're going and you don't have anything to hit, you need to readjust or something, just tap the anvil. But you don't want to really hit it because you put dents in the face of your anvil. It's going to make it harder to work. Every time you work, instead of having a flat bottom on your piece, it's going to dent it in like that. So that's why, in case you're wondering, nice healthy temperature. Nope, not quite a healthy temperature. Okay, that was just a little high, but that's okay. A little bit of sparking, probably not preferable. I'm gonna switch to a slightly smaller hammer, but it'll be okay. A lot of sparking, you may not be able to redeem your piece. So I'm just kind of experimenting around here, working on different places of the anvil. When you're doing an edge, oftentimes you're gonna hit just a little past that, so don't do it in the middle, or at least you can, but just be careful if you do, because oftentimes you're hitting real close, you're gonna wind up hitting the face of your anvil. So go to the edge, oftentimes is what I will do. There we go, got a pretty clean looking edge there. I'm gonna center it, and should be about all this piece needs. So I'm putting the body of the axe back in the forge. I'm gonna heat that up. Then I will insert that bit. I'm gonna take this over to the vise. I will use the chisel to open up the end of the body, and then I will slot that bit into the body, close it up. It will not be welded. I'll also flex it while I'm there. I'll flex it, then close it up. Then I'll take it back to the forge, and then we will weld it. Okay, so this is about getting to the point where it's going to look more like an axe. It's not hot enough, okay. Barely sparking, but it's gonna be all right. One of the nice things about leg vices, if you have one, you don't need it, but if you do have one, I have never run into another vise that holds things as securely as a leg vise will. And of course, there's also the fact that a leg vise will not budge when you hit it. If it's properly secured, that is, which mine is, relatively. go. It should be about good. So what I'm going to do here, a few taps. We're then going to grab this with the tongs. Get in there. Open this up. Give it a little flex. Now this stage is critical. If you do not flex this, it will probably not weld together. So do not forget to flex it. Taking it back to the vise here, I'll then use this vise essentially like a press to close this all up, make it all tight. I'm gonna pull this out of there now. And if you see, it's sticking together just because we've kind of squeezed it, stuck it down there, and it's holding pretty good. So I'm gonna stick this all in the forge, give it all a good welding heat. One thing you want to keep in mind here is all the various parts of the axe. So you're going to be bringing the part where it's joined together. You're going to bring that up to a welding heat. You want to be careful because the tip of the axe, like this part essentially, this is what I'm calling the tip of the axe. It's probably not the right thing to call it. It's probably going to be closer to the blower. So you're going to want to be careful because about the time that comes up to a bright, mid to higher welding heat, that may be sparking. So we're probably going to want to do this at, kind of a medium, not a high welding heat. A high welding heat gets dangerous. Other thing is that this really relates to an earlier part. When just throughout the entire process, you want to be careful not to burn through the eye part of the axe because that's thinner. Anything thinner will naturally, as you would expect, heat up quicker and thusly burn much faster. So you want to be very careful when you're doing that. This is on the lower spectrum of welding heats. I think it should still weld though. It's a little safer. Be careful about that. A little safer to weld in the lower range, just because you're less likely to burn your steel. I tend to go pretty high. I have been welding for a little while now. I'm not a great welder. Yeah, it is. The higher spectrum of welding heats. And as I said, you're just going to need to get some experience on welding. There's really no way I can tell you exactly what it looks like. It's kind of similar. You might look for kind of a lemon yellow to a white. The camera usually portrays it as bright as it is. So I'm just trying to blend in these lines where we welded it. And there's a larger hammer now. What I'm doing now is I'm just beveling the edge down to a good, just beveling it down so it'll make a good edge. As you can see, it's not quite at a right angle. So how you fix that, at least how I fixed it in the past, usually flip this around. Either I'll take it to the edge here, and we'll just hit the edge in, like so, or you can also take it, especially if you have a more conical horn, and do this. This horn is a little harder for doing this than my other anvil's horn is. So I do prefer to use the other one, but this is also where, if you have them, a pair of knee tongs will come in really handy. I was just starting to work on making myself a pair the other day, but I don't actually have them yet. Yeah. This is what we call profiling usually. Maybe use this. No, that's not gonna work. Part of the fun of being a blacksmith, you just kind of gotta experiment around on what parts of your anvils work for what. All right, so the forging part on this axe is about done. Probably another heat and bevel it. Thinning down the bit a little bit here. I'm gonna switch to the round die. There's a flat die on here, and a round die. It's a rounding hammer. And I'm using that round die to give it a bevel. I'm also probably gonna take this one to a planishing heat, which means pretty low, very dull red kind of heat. And that's just for kind of straightening up and everything. It's a little bit easier when it's not quite so easy to move to get it correct. Also try to take any deep hammer marks out. Little ones are fine. This is an axe, not a knife. What do you think? So this is a drift. You don't actually necessarily need one for making your first axe, but you are going to need one to make very many. And this that I'm setting it on here, this sort of anvil-like object, is a swage block. Now, this is not a store-bought swage block. This is an improvised swage block. It's a large chunk of steel with a hole through it that works for sinking things like drifts through axes. Basically, what a drift does, if you don't already know, it sizes a hole that you've made to a particular shape and size. Here's where we are so far. We have the blade fully forged. The final step that we still have to do are take this to the vise, clamp it in, and file it, do any sort of profiling like that we need to get it just how we want it. Afterwards, we will normalize this 3 times and then quench it, then temper it. I've explained those in a previous video and I'll explain them again as we do them. Yeah, after that, it's just, we gotta handle it and we're good for sharpening. I'm just tapering down the edge here just because I think it looks better. Also, I am using a 6-pound hammer, but for most of this process, I have been using a 3-pound hammer, which is a perfectly reasonable weight. That's kind of the whole idea of making this style of axe. You can do this without a power hammer, without a press. You don't need a ton of machinery to make one of my favorite projects, which is an axe. So what I'm doing here is hot rasping. Pretty self-explanatory. Rasping while it's hot. Gotta think in medieval days, they wouldn't have had angle grinders or belt grinders. Although, I have used angle grinders and belt grinders, and they do not leave nearly as nice of a surface finish, especially if you want it scaly, as a hot rasp will. And if you're wondering what this is literally just a farrier's rasp. It's very well. And if you know, or can get in touch with a farrier, a local farrier, he's probably literally got buckets of them sitting around that he won't use because they're too dull. Well, too dull is actually perfect for hot rasping, so you don't need to get a brand new one. They did also use grinding stones, and I do have actually 2 of those, which I may show in this video or maybe in a later video, I don't know. Also, brushing it is something I should probably do more often, but the reason why is just kind of keep it clean, and also you have bits of scale on there. Then if you hammer on them, they're gonna press down into it and kind of create a little bit of a lumpy face on it. That's not a problem for some things, but you don't want too much of it on, especially a knife, but axes, you know, you don't want too much. So here, normalizing it. I will do this in a later video. I will go over how this is done. Basically, heating up to a temperature where it becomes non-magnetic, which is approximately 1600 degrees, 3 times. Letting it cool in the air. I'll go over that in more detail at a later date. So, here we are moving on to the handling. I'm just cutting a 32-inch piece off of a vine maple log I cut in my local area. It's always a good thing to cut, just look in your local area, figure out what sort of wood you have. It's good for handles and that sort of thing, because local pretty much always better, especially if you can do it yourself. So, like everything else we're doing on the channel, it's going to be kind of a medieval, old school way. Honestly, a lot of what I do is actually probably pre-medieval, but you know what I mean. I'm going to be splitting a plank out of this. I want to make sure that I kind of split the knots out, going roughly along the center line. Take this other wedge, slot it in just below, and this one will probably finish the split. There we go. So there's the thinner plank. This one's got some knots in it, so I'm gonna use the other side. There you go. It's a pretty good looking handle blank. So if you're a subscriber, you've probably seen me do this before. If you're not, you can become one. But basically I'm just gonna be hacking a handle. Start off using my carving axe. Out of this, I'm just gonna be going for kind of a straight style handle with a very slight backwards curve. So that's what I'm doing now. This is where if you have a draw knife, it would come in really handy. I do a lot of the rough hacking on a hatchet because it's pretty fast. I can get stuff done pretty quickly, but if I had a draw knife, I would definitely use one for shaping the handle a lot. So maybe in an upcoming video, I'll make one. Near future-ish. But yeah, if you have one, it'd be a good tool to use here. So I've basically done a lot of rasping on this to get this down to a little bit of a finer, basically the right shape, not quite the right finish. We have the pieces almost ready to go now. We have the handle here, that still needs finished, just smoothed up basically. We have the wedge, and then we have the head. Still needs heat treated. The final steps in the heat, or finished heat treating that is. Final steps in the heat treating are just quenching and tempering. We've already normalized it. This is my scraping system that I pretty much just came up with. Literally like pretty much just now. All you need is a vise or something like that, a 90-degree corner, and of course your piece that you're working on. You have seen me, if you've been watching the channel, use back of a knife for a scraper before. That works works plenty well, and I may do that as well, but this is working pretty fast, so we'll see how it goes. Basically, just going like this. It is important that the corner you're using to scrape is 90 degrees. Like it has to be a sharp corner. So this corner here, this will not work. This is a bevel corner, but this side is very sharp. So that's the side I'm using. Just darkening it here with some fire. Just charring the wood a little bit. We're going in for the quench. Just going to heat it up again to non-magnetic temperature. As I said, I will do a video just solely on heat treating because it deserves it, but yeah, gonna heat it up to non-magnetic, quench it in water, I think. All right. You want to be careful when you're quenching in water. So after you pull it out of the quench, it's now actually going to be quite fully hardened. It'll take like a minute and a half for it to finish the hardening process. So if you want to do any filing on the edge to try and see any colors, that's when you want to do it. Even now, it's just about too hard now. It's about as hard as my file is. Arresting the temper here. Don't know what I just did. I will explain it in more detail at a later date, but I just tempered it. Basically, hold on, I gotta finish cooling this off because you don't want it to over temper. That would make it too soft. Basically, tempering is the process of after you quench it. Well, yeah, when you quench it, I should say, it gets too hard. So tempering it is where you draw that hardness back just enough to where it's tough and it won't snap because it gets too brittle when you quench it. There you go. Yeah, it's tough, but it's not too soft. It's still just a little hot, not real bad, but you can see the colors. You can see that, I hope you can, it's kind of a blue, not quite perfectly even. There's also some kind of straw color in there, so as they call it. It's also called bronze color. That's what it is. It's kind of a brownish yellow. That's how you know when you're getting it. They're called temper colors. That's how you know when it's being tempered. So it has now been successfully tempered. And what you actually want, you want everything back here to be softer and just mainly the edge to be real hard. So that's why this was even getting red hot. That's perfectly fine. The heat travels through it, but this part was not actually in the coals. So the heat travels through this and made this part softer. That's exactly what I want. It's all ready to go now. Now the pieces are fully finished. We have the handle here, the head here, the wedge here. Let's put them together. Right, so got it just stuck on the end there. I'm gonna flip it around. A few taps from the bottom. This is usually a better way to do it. Right. So I have this posted up over the swage block, just so, because we want this to stick out just slightly on the end. You could also do this over the jaws of your vise, or you could even tap it like this, down. But I find this is probably the easiest way for me to do it, so do it with whatever tools you have. There we go, it's perfect. So now I'm gonna stick in the wedge. You want this wedge just barely wider than your eye, in my experience. Now, I'm not talking about your human eye, I'm talking about the eye of your axe. And oftentimes I will flip this around part way through and do it from the bottom. Right now it's still going in really good, so. A wooden mallet will work pretty well. It's probably a safer bet. You could break it with this metal hammer because it's so hard. And tap some more and look. And tap a little more. Look. Give it some stiffer taps now that it's well seated. And look. And it's looking pretty good. See how nicely that wedge took? It's beautiful. So, that is how you forge a medieval Viking axe using only medieval tools and materials. A few words of warning. Also, this turned out really cool. I really like it. A few words of warning though. Things you don't want to do. This. Here's an earlier one that I made a little while ago. And essentially, it was turning out just fine until I overheated it. I burned it. And you may see in the video of making this, I also burned this one just slightly. Wasn't real bad. I was able to fix it, no problem. So if you just see a few sparks, pull it out right away, it'll be okay. You see a lot of sparks, you may have done this and you may have to restart. So don't burn it. Another one, here's another one that I made some time ago. I welded it together and I accidentally welded the ends together. Don't do that, because if you remember, I have to chisel the ends apart to insert the bit. You can't do that if it's welded together. So don't do that. And try 3. Anyway, yeah, let's go give this thing a little bit of testing and some beauty shots. So, I hope you liked that. I hope you found it informative. And I hope most of all that I inspired you to go make something. Wherever you're at in your craftsmanship journey, go make something at your depth, whether you can make a cool axe like this or something else. And yeah, until next time, Farewell, wherever you fare.